Hi, this is Mark Cooper Smith in my ongoing series of conversations with innovators, entrepreneurs, and all sorts of great people who are trying to make a dent in the world in the most positive way. And it's my pleasure to welcome to this second of two videos, Tim Smith, who's the portfolio operations partner at B Partners. Tim, thanks for joining.
Happy to be here anytime, Mark.
So in our first video, we talked about what is prototyping, why do we need it, and how do we use it? And so if you haven't seen that yet, I would go back and watch that one first. Now, this is the video where we're going to talk a little bit more about how to do it. So you're the portfolio operations partner at B Partners. You make investments in, your firm makes investments in early stage companies, which I appreciate as a limited partner as well. So I love the fact that you're empowering these early stage entrepreneurs, and then they have you and your team to work with them to move as quickly as possible to create great products, great services, great ways of changing the world. When you start working with a new company that you've just made an investment in, where do you start? What do you do when it comes to prototyping?
Well, let's reprise a little bit of the last conversation, Mark. We start with level setting, and this was a diagram we talked about in the prior video. And level setting is around how does this team operate and how have they operated to date? How much have they built and how they built it? And a big part of that is that first arrow there, which is, do they have a vision? Is it a collectively understood vision, collectively articulated vision? Is everyone on the same page? Man, if you don't have that, you're starting off on the wrong foot to begin with. And we do see this a lot. So do they have a vision that's articulatable or demonstrable? Then are they in a process, a development, design, test process that makes a lot of sense with modern tools and modern processes, sprint mentality? And then do we feel like they have the ability to ship the product? So this is the first level setting thing that we look at. The next one that's pretty important to us is this simple diagram we had in the prior video as well, which is, what is a minimum viable prototype? And we defined the difference between MVPs, minimum viable product, and prototyping in the prior video. But with regard to prototyping, it's, are they willing to build prototypes fast for small components of what they're building and trying to build, test it, and then potentially throw it away and try again? Do they not get caught in sunk costs? And we've got to keep incrementalizing on a bad idea. So it's when to get the feedback you have and then move on. And all of these are key indicators of the team's ability to sprint the way we like them to. Then we get into the actual tools.
Perfect. So we're going to presume that if you've written a check, if you've welcomed them to the B Partners portfolio of companies, you feel they have the right vision, that they have the right team, and that they can execute. Right. But when you sit down with them, and let's say they don't have the kinds of prototypes that are at that right level of fidelity or testing, where do you start? What do you prototype? How do you prototype? Kind of, lay us out kind of how you put the roadmap in place, and then we're going to walk our way through it.
Okay, great. I'm going to bring up another chart here. It's a bit of an eye test here, but this is a realization. When I first started putting together this workshop 6+ years ago for the Skydeck Accelerator at Cal, I realized that it was not going to be very effective to recommend very specific tools. We're all surfing Moore's Law here. Everything changes 12 to 18 months, pretty much. We're going to see new tools all the time. So I really wanted to come up with a framework that described categories of tools. So if you look at this diagram on the screen here, there's two axes. One is a scale from linear interactive to interactive. So linear straight content like video, up to interactive content, things you can actually press the button and something happens, or branch here and something happens. On the horizontal axis, we've got visual resolution, which is from very low, like storyboards and wireframes, all the way out to video. And this landscape then becomes a really rich place to explore. And so we will find out, where is this team in this landscape and their product development cycle? Are they very early? Then we know exactly what tools to use, storyboards, wireframes, etc. But more often, they're beyond that. They're beyond the design thinking stage, and it's time to look at very serious collaborative tools. And that's when we get into screen-based interaction, object-based interaction. All of these we define in some detail in the detailed workshop. But it's really a march up this, and you will go from one tool to another. There's really no one tool that might take you the whole way until you reach kind of, the holy grail, which is that final product top right.
So are you working your way up kind of, from lower left to upper right, kind of along that diagonal, or are there times you're gonna hug maybe the visual resolution axis
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
interactive resolution just to test one thing?
Let me give you an example. Let me see if I can get this to work and see if it work on the Zoom here. This is an actual product that I worked on for Verizon Wireless, and this would be an example of a vision piece. Nothing that was in this on this screen here, the tablet, the phone, the desktop, none of that was real. This was shot blank on my kitchen table in Marin County. That phone you're looking at now, there was nothing on the screen. So everything was built in After Effects. It looks really real. And in fact, this was used in Vegas at their developers conference to pitch the concept of a store for Verizon. This is a vision. It's a linear vision. It's very high resolution. It's nothing you could turn over to a dev team to say, build this. But that would be an example, Mark, of out here on this lower axis, just a high resolution video that resulted in a $30 million investment by Verizon, just so everybody could see the vision. So that's an example of something that's low resolution on the interactive axis, but high resolution on video, and it serves a very definitive purpose in selling the concept. So that's where you could get off this S curve. But normally you're going to march up that curve if you're building the actual product.
And there may be certain types of interaction with the product that you just have to test. That may be a gating factor. So that might be low resolution on the visual side, but high on the interactive, just to see if people will actually engage in that way. Is that right?
That's going to be your judgment. You have to make sure that the interface you're using, whether it's paper in paper prototyping and design thinking, or a really low end kind of tool like Marvel or something like that, you have to make sure that the tool you're using to depict the process is not getting in the way of the customer or the user's response. You don't want them, again, we talked about this in the prior video, you don't want the person you're testing with to say, here's how you improve your prototype. You want them to say, here's how you improve your product. Subtle difference, but important.
Yeah. And one of the things, I'll jump a little bit ahead because I know we'll go there, and I have some and you have some amazing resources that in the description of this particular video, we'll put links to a few places where there's kind of a broad assortment of tools that you may be able to use. And Tim, I know we'll have a chance to touch upon them as we go through this. So hardware versus software. How do you prototype those differently? They're so fundamentally different.
That's right. Well, let's talk about that. A lot of people say, well, you don't prototype hardware, you just start building. And I don't buy that. We use an example, and let me see if I can bring it up again. We use an example in the workshop where we're looking at something like the Oculus headset, for example.
Right.
And what you're going to see in a progression like that is you'll see early prototypes that could be cardboard. I love cardboard and masking tape. They could be like this. They could be functional, but really ugly, very expensive, completely impractical to go to market. They end up looking like a consumer product, but in most cases, they go through a stepwise function of development and throwaway prototypes. The first two I showed you were throwaway prototypes. Now, interesting point is what's actually happening more and more these days is you don't do a hardware product without a software component. So you're building hybrid environments, and you should have parallel tracks in many cases where you're iterating on both of those tracks and prototypes. You can have a wireframe prototype on software and a cardboard prototype, on the hardware, and you iterate up that stack until you have a product that comes together in the end.
Which makes perfect sense. And especially as we see, products that have shipped, it used to be once you shipped that piece of hardware, it was stuck. But now we know over the air upgrade, even cars, right? Tesla cars get better with software upgrades, even though the hardware doesn't change one bit. Okay, really cool. So when you think about the different environments that you prototype in, we've talked about physical versus digital versus whatever else it is. Kind of any tips to us, kind of where we would think about starting and how we evolve from there?
Well, look, as you select the right tools, I think one of the most important things is a prototype without sharing it is the sound of one hand clapping. To get all Buddhist on you. It's like you have to look at collaborative tools. And the good news is we have a wealth of resources now. So you want to think about who you're going to be exposing this prototype to: dev team, product team, design team, customers, etc. Are you working on a platform? An example might be Adobe XD, where we do a lot of our work.
Right.
That's a product that can span a huge range of potential users and abilities to mock up things. So you want to be careful that collaboration is a key part of your prototyping strategy. You're not just building one-offs that you can just share with your core team or something. So that would be a big one.
So there are many tools that are out there. And when you think about prototyping, and I'll seed this with a few, I mean, I oftentimes, for example, some of my programs will require that you put together a quick and dirty demo video as a way to prototype the user experience or whatever else it is. I know you've had teams go through and use Marvel app or use Autodesk products or other things like that. What are some of the tools that you particularly like, and where might we find more?
Well, there's just a wealth of these things. Let's look at this again. Storyboards and wireframes are going to have a whole category of products down there. I use Keynote for a huge amount of prototyping. Keynote, which is PowerPoint's version on the Apple, and a lot of high-end designers use Keynote for this for a lot of reasons I'm not going to go into. As you move up this stack of complexity in the prototyping tools, you are getting into tools that require more training, more understanding of the person manipulating the tools. Screen-based interaction, object-based interaction. So there's a sweet spot in the middle, Mark, which is where you mentioned one of these apps, Marvel apps, which is one that we use because it's free to trial in the workshop. It's very simple to learn. You can produce, it's just got that sweet spot of you can do stuff fast, it's easy to learn, and you can get it out in the street fast. As you're looking at more complex interactions that you have to model out, you do have to work up into prototyping tools that inquire, in some cases, some coding, emulating more higher level languages that you're going to target later. So it's really, it's going to change over time. I will say, as we look at this chart, we see a lot of companies come to us, and I see a lot of companies at Skydeck, they start up there at the top of the right. They start writing Python code. And they start writing the target environment. That's typically a big mistake.
Yeah. One of the things that I also see a number of my teams do is use easy to create website creators like Wix or others, where you can create professional looking websites in just a few hours. So
crazy fast.
It makes it very real.
Great prototyping tool. That's a really great. Let me give you one other example, which I love. I've seen it recently. We had a company a year or two ago pitch us on a VTOL commuter rig, vertical takeoff and landing, which I would love, because I would love to take off from my property in Marin and fly to San Francisco and land on top of the B building. Great. A lot of problems with that. How are you going to mock that up? How are you going to pitch that? What they pitched with was the sales brochure for this hypothetical product. Glossy, gorgeous, had the price on it, had all the beautiful photography. They didn't build nothing. But you get that brochure in your hand and you're like, wow, would I buy this? It really makes that psychological jump. Even though it's a piece of paper describing a complex piece of hardware, it gets you a lot of feedback. And it could just, disable the whole company idea if you do enough testing. There's no way I would ever pay that much money to do that, ever.
That's what I love. Great entrepreneurs make things real as fast as possible. Maybe not at the highest fidelity, but it gives you that feedback.
You got to get to the nose as quickly as possible.
Now, there are some things that you don't really want to prototype, like the usual logon process or whatever else. What are some things that you would say, guys, move past these? Here's where you want to focus on prototyping.
One of our great portfolio companies is a company called Crowdbotics. The second-time founder, Anand Kulkarni, is brilliant. And one of the crazy insights that Crowdbotics has was, we're at the point where he and his team looked out across the public open source repository of functionality out there in GitHub, Bitbucket, et cetera, and realized we've got all the Lego parts tested, battle tested over and over to build virtually anything. So why are we repeating ourselves? The old programmer's mantra, don't repeat yourself, dry. We're doing it all the time. So I would say if you're looking at something like onboarding authentication, right? OAuth, or you're trying to log in a bunch of people, it's been done a gazillion times. You don't need to prototype that. Prototype the bespoke compelling, provocative, step function parts of your application or your hardware, because that's what the investors want to look at, and that's what the customers want to test.
Right.
It's not whether you've got a decent onboarding experience. I mean,
So
it's important.
one of the things that the acronyms that I've heard you use a lot is HMI, especially when it talks about kind of,
Right.
how you attacking some of those gritty, those tough problems. What does that mean, and kind of how do you use it within the spectrum of prototyping?
Yeah, well, I didn't make that up. It's comes from design thinking. It's how
Right.
might I is what HMI stands for, and it's the prefix to a problem. It's like, you want to do this. I'm working on an internal portal for B right now, B Partners, that we're building is bespoke, and I've got 4 pages now of HMI questions. So it's, how might I do this? How might I do that? How, and you just fill this page to the how might I's. Then you triage those, the important, the relative importance, and those are all candidates for prototyping. How might I do this? And then the answer to that how might I is, how do I do it most efficiently, most elegantly, most cost effectively, most creatively? I don't know. Your job is to innovate as an entrepreneur. So that's the beauty of a how might I, because you can just throw a whole bunch of hypothetical ideas out there, which make up the bulk of your product.
And you want to anchor those right back on the problem you're solving, right? They should emanate from that problem you're solving and how you're going to solve it, whether it's customer discovery or evaluating what the competitive landscape looks like. How are you going to do it differently and better?
That's right. And what you don't need to prototype. How might I onboard a customer with a Google email address? You don't need to prototype that. We've done it a million times.
Yeah. All right. So give us, just as we wrap up in the next few minutes, kind of give us an arc of the process, kind of where you start, the tools that you use. If you were just going to kind of take us through all of the different points that we've touched on and kind of summarize this, like, what is the takeaway on kind of how you do a really good job in prototyping, and especially rapid prototyping, and when are you done?
Yeah, well, let's go back to my main event loop here. Nothing gets me more excited than a compelling vision and how it's articulated. And it runs the gamut how you do that. It can be a beautifully produced, executed video like I showed you for the Verizon project. It could be an entrepreneur that simply comes into our office and fills a whiteboard with ad hoc, off the cuff ideas that he or she has been thinking about. That can be just as impressive. So, but if you can't get me excited about that vision, and it better be a reach, then you're off to a bad foot to begin with. Then, as I said earlier, we want to see how fast they can iterate. We want to see how fast they can triage. Maybe it's those HMI questions. How fast can you get to the most important, most difficult? Which frogs are you going to eat first? Prototype those, iterate. How are you going to test them? And then we're going to be a pretty strict judge of, how aggressive are you in being ready to ship. And as you said, if you're a web service or something like that, where we can iteratively process, via the cloud, it should be earlier rather than later. There is a too early and too dangerous, but we like to push that limit.
Takeaways. Last thoughts on this. So we've talked about kind of the main event loop, but if we were to look back and say, all right, here's some of the trade-offs, here's what you want to do, kind of, repeating your key takeaways, what might those be?
Well, it would be to the developers, put down your code to start with. For the designers, it would be close your Photoshop app. For the team, it's almost like put your pencils down and let's start rough and cheap. Cheap, perfect. And fast.
Rough, cheap, and fast. I mean, I think that's the key takeaway. And it doesn't all need to be bolted onto one prototype. You might be solving different parts of the problem with different prototypes to get to that. I guess the one other thing that I would add and ask your comment on this, and that is, do we want our customers to design the products for us? Or do we design the products and then have our customers and stakeholders give us the feedback on those?
We have, I have a great slide on that. I'm not sure if I could bring it up fast, but it is, here it is. I'm going to bring it up for you. Hang on. It's this one. Here's what customers are going to tell you when you're testing. They're going to tell you what's wrong with the product. They're going to tell you what works well with the product. Both of those you pay close attention to. They're also going to tell you how to fix your product, almost inevitably. turn the button red. I like red better. You can note those, but pay attention because it's, as I said before, it's your job to innovate. To the extent that you pay attention to number 3 and your enthusiasm to please the customer, you start going down a slippery slope of becoming a professional services company instead of a product company. And that's not what we typically invest in. And so we get this enthusiasm to please the customer, but we also are really, really concerned as we look at our early investments that they're not just becoming a professional services company for that first, golden customer.
Right.
You have to be building your product in the end.
Yeah, so that is so true. I mean, entrepreneurs have a vision. It's informed by problems that you see in the market and opportunities, but your vision then and your ability to execute sets you apart from everybody else that, or so many others that may be trying to tackle that. And prototyping is a way to test that, right?
Yes.
All right. Tim, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing with us kind of what that boot camp looks like, how you take teams through it, and we'll see where they come out on the back end. I always look forward to seeing what great products are coming and teams and companies are coming out of B Partners. Really appreciate your time today.
You got it, man. Thanks, Mark.